Shamrocks everywhere, rainbows and pots of gold, bagpipes wailing somewhere in the distance, the very real threat of being pinched if you forgot to wear green, corned beef, cabbage, and if you were in the United States, an absolutely unhinged amount of green beer. Yes, friends, St. Patrick's Day is upon us. Chicago dyes their entire river green. My dad used to pass out green carnations at a busy intersection in Peoria, Illinois. Boston and New York throw legendary celebrations of Irish American culture. Every bar in the country has green beer on tap. Irish pubs are wall-to-wall humans. And for one glorious day, apparently, everyone is Irish. I'm going to be completely honest with you. St. Patrick's Day is one of my favorite holidays. It's fun. It's a little frivolous. It involves celebrating my ancestry. What's not to love? It's harmless, as long as you have a designated driver. Right? Well, as it turns out, the way we celebrate St. Patrick's Day in the US is a uniquely American invention. Celebrations are much more low-key in Ireland itself, at least until the late 20th century. And then there is that whole thing about St. Patrick banishing the snakes from Ireland, a country that, fun fact, never had any snakes to begin with. And the lore around those snakes, deeply, fascinatingly connected to paganism. So today, we are going to unpack all of it. Who was St. Patrick? Why does he get a whole holiday? What is the actual deal with those snakes? And can you, as a pagan, still enjoy a Guinness on March 17th without massive guilt? Spoiler, yes. Absolutely yes. Let's get into it. So, who was St. Patrick actually? Because based on the holiday, you might assume he was just a very enthusiastic Irish guy who liked shamrocks and four-leaf clovers. But the real story is considerably weirder and more interesting. St. Patrick was born in Roman Britain sometime in the 300s CE into a wealthy family. His father was a deacon, his grandfather was a priest, so Christianity was already very much the family business. According to a document he allegedly wrote himself called the Declaration, Patrick was kidnapped by Irish raiders at the age of 16 and brought to Gaelic Ireland as a slave. Now, it is worth noting that slavery in ancient Ireland was quite different from the chattel slavery that most of us in the US are more familiar with. Irish slavery was hierarchical. The lowest classes were not free, but they could work their way out of bondage during their lifetimes. And their children were not automatically born into slavery. It was still deeply awful, but structurally different from what was practiced, say, in the American South centuries later. So, teenage Patrick, now a shepherd in Ireland, claims that while alone on the hills, he found God, heard a voice, had a vision, the whole thing. Eventually he escaped, made his way back to Britain, trained as a priest, and then, here's the part that I think is kind of fascinating, voluntarily returned to Ireland, the place that enslaved him, to convert the people there to Christianity. I mean, points for commitment, I guess? Patrick died on March 17th, sometime in the 400s CE. He's said to be buried at Downpatrick in Ireland, and over the centuries that followed, mountains of lore, legend, and tradition grew up around his legacy. He eventually became the patron saint of Ireland. The feast day of St. Patrick was made an official holiday by the Catholic Church in the early 17th century, and it was observed by the Catholic Church, the Anglican Communion, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the Lutheran Church. Traditionally, March 17th was marked by church services, feasting, and yes, alcohol. In fact, St. Patrick's Day was a designated loophole in Lent, a single day when all the usual Lenten restrictions were lifted, meaning you could eat meat and drink to your heart's content. A holy loophole, truly inspired theological engineering. Okay, the snakes. Let's talk about the snakes. The most famous legend associated with St. Patrick is that he drove all of the snakes out of Ireland. You've probably heard this one. Big dramatic moment. Patrick commands the snakes, snakes slither into the sea, Ireland is forever snake-free, everyone celebrates. Woohoo! Here is the problem. Ireland never had snakes. Like, at all. You see, Ireland is a post-glacial island. After the last ice age, when the land bridges that might have allowed snakes to migrate over were already gone, Ireland was simply never colonized by snakes. There are no native snake species in Ireland. There never were. St. Patrick did not banish the snakes because there were no snakes to banish. And here's the second problem. The snake story didn't even show up in Patrick's lore until several centuries after his death. The first references to the snake banishing miracle appear around the 12th century, roughly 700 years after Patrick actually lived. So this is not a contemporary account. This is legend, built up over time, which is honestly how a lot of saint mythology works. Now, and this is a part where it gets interesting for us, there is a popular theory that the snakes in this story were actually a metaphor for pagans. Snakes have long been used in Christian symbolism to represent evil, sin, and the non-Christian other. The idea is that when the legend says Patrick drove out the snakes, what it really meant was that he drove out pagan practice from Ireland. Now, scholars largely agree that the specific snake equals pagan interpretation is probably not literally what the story was meant to convey. It was more likely just a miracle legend of the kind that got attached to many saints. But it is absolutely true that St. Patrick's mission was to convert pagans to Christianity, and that he did so with remarkable, some might say aggressive, dedication. So while St. Patrick probably did not literally or symbolically banish the pagans of Ireland, he did absolutely interact with them. And some of those interactions are genuinely fascinating. According to tradition, when Patrick was trying to establish his main church at Armagh, a pagan chieftain named Dara refused to give him the hill he wanted and offered him lower ground instead. Patrick accepted, until Dara's horses wandered out onto the church land and promptly died. Dara, furious, set men to kill Patrick. But then Dara himself fell ill. His men begged Patrick to heal him. Patrick did, and in gratitude, Dara gave Patrick the hill and a great bronze cauldron. Let me let that sink in. A great bronze cauldron. Scholars have noted that Dara bears a striking resemblance to the Dagda, an Irish deity who is, famously, the owner of a magical cauldron of plenty. You know, like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So the story may be a Christianized retelling of a pagan myth, with Patrick essentially absorbing the symbols and power of the old gods. This is actually pretty common in the history of Christianity, spreading through pagan cultures. Rather than erasing everything, it often incorporated existing symbols into a new framework. There's another story involving a pagan chieftain named Crom, who sends a bull to attack Patrick, only to have the bull meekly submit to him. Patrick slaughters it, eats it, and then, at Crom's demand, miraculously brings it back to life. In some versions, Crom is so impressed that he converts to Christianity. In others, the bull kills him. The bull's choice, honestly. And here's the pagan thread in that one. Crom Sunday in parts of Ireland corresponds to Lunasa, the pagan harvest festival on August 1st. The legend likely echoes bull sacrifices associated with that festival. We will cover Lunasa on this channel later this year. The point being, the line between early Irish Christianity and Irish paganism is much blurrier than you might expect. They were having conversations, tense, theologically loaded, occasionally involving miraculous livestock, but conversations nonetheless. Let's talk about the shamrock, because it is everywhere this time of year, and it has a surprisingly interesting backstory. According to legend, Patrick used the shamrock, a three-leafed plant, to explain the concept of the Holy Trinity to the pagans he was trying to convert. 3 leaves, 1 plant. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a good metaphor, honestly. Very visual. There is also a tradition called drowning the shamrock, where you place a shamrock at the bottom of a glass, fill it with whiskey, beer, or cider, toast, drink, and then either eat the shamrock or throw it over your shoulder for luck, which is a very pagan-sounding ritual being performed in celebration of a Christian saint. and I just want to clock that. Now, what actually is a shamrock? It's a family of plants that includes several types of clover and wood sorrel. Fun fact, shamrocks are not exclusively Irish. They grow all over Europe and the Americas. There is no botanical evidence that they are native to Ireland specifically. So the most iconic symbol of Ireland is a plant that grows basically everywhere. We love that for us. And of course, a 3-leaf clover is lucky, but a 4-leaf clover is especially lucky. In plant terms, that 4-leaf version is a genetic mutation. They occur roughly once in every 10,000 clovers. So if you find one, hold on to it. So, how do we get from a fairly low-key Irish religious feast day to Chicago dyeing its entire river green? The answer is Irish immigration to the United States. The Great Famine of the 1840s drove massive waves of Irish immigration to the U.S., particularly to cities like Boston, New York, and Chicago. These communities brought their culture with them, and St. Patrick's Day became a way to celebrate and assert Irish American identity, especially in the face of significant anti-Irish prejudice. The first St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City was held in 1762, before the United States even existed as a country. And fun fact, the very first St. Patrick's Day parade ever was held in St. Augustine, Florida in 1601. Over time, the holiday became less religious and more of a cultural celebration. And then, as American holidays tend to do, it became enormously commercialized. Today, the U.S. spends billions of dollars on St. Patrick's Day celebrations every year. Ireland's approach to the holiday has actually shifted in response to the American version. For much of the 20th century, Irish St. Patrick's Day celebrations were relatively modest. It was not until the late 20th and early 21st centuries that Ireland leaned into larger scale celebrations, in part to capitalize on tourism. There have also been critiques of some of the holiday's associated imagery, particularly stereotypical depictions of Irish people, including the leprechaun, which is not Ireland's favorite export. Irish marketing firms have worked hard to move the global image of Irish culture away from some of the more reductive stereotypes. A fair goal. My hot take, if it brings you genuine joy, celebrate it. Just maybe retire the cartoonish stuff and lean into the actual richness of Irish culture, which is genuinely extraordinary. Speaking of Irish American inventions, let's talk about corned beef and cabbage. Here is a fact that will surprise roughly half of the people watching this. Corned beef and cabbage is not a traditional Irish dish. It is an Irish American dish. In Ireland, the traditional equivalent is bacon and cabbage, a salted, boiled cut of pork served alongside cabbage and potatoes. But when Irish immigrants arrived in the U.S., pork was expensive and harder to come by. What was cheap and readily available? Corned beef, sold by Jewish butchers in cities like New York. Irish and Jewish immigrant communities often lived in the same neighborhoods, and corned beef became a delicious, affordable substitute. It caught on, became a staple of Irish American cooking, and the rest, as they say, is culinary history. So, every time you eat corned beef and cabbage on St. Patrick's Day, you are eating a dish that was born from two immigrant communities supporting each other, which honestly makes it taste better. I make mine by roasting it, by the way. I threw out the seasoning packet entirely, and it comes out absolutely incredible. I'll link my corned beef video in the description, and I'll throw it up in shorts. And cabbage is fine on its own, but if you want the real experience, make colcannon. Mashed potatoes with butter and cabbage mixed in. It is one of the great dishes of the world, and I will not be taking questions. I want to share my most memorable St. Patrick's Day with you, because it is genuinely one of the stranger and more wonderful experiences of my life. Picture it. It was 1993. I was living in Russia, of all places, and I had just gotten into Moscow for a long weekend. And it happened to be March 17th. I started the day at the airport, which, of all places, had a Guinness bar. Several pints in, some locals invited us to an Irish bar in Moscow. Irish dancing, lots of drinks, and a truly surreal celebration of Irish culture in the middle of Russia. Turns out, Moscow had held its very first St. Patrick's Day parade just the year before in 1992. I was there for year 2. It was one of the most unexpectedly joyful experiences of my life, and I was just beginning my pagan journey at the time. Isn't that cool? It's kind of fun. It was a great day. It's a good reminder that culture, real, living, human culture, travels. It adapts. It finds home in places you would never expect. And sometimes it finds you in an airport bar in Moscow at noon on a Tuesday. I couldn't make it up if I tried. So, the question we started with, can you celebrate St. Patrick's Day as a pagan? Here is my take. Absolutely, unequivocally, yes. And here's why. St. Patrick's Day, as it exists now, particularly in its American form, is not really a deeply Christian religious observance for most people who celebrate it. It is a cultural celebration of Irish heritage, community, and, let's be honest, a very good excuse to eat corned beef and have a drink. Beyond that, the holiday is absolutely saturated with elements that have pagan roots. The shamrock, the cauldron imagery, the luck traditions, the association with the land and the natural world, the agricultural symbolism that sneaks through in the old folklore. March 17th falls close to the spring equinox, which is a significant moment in many pagan traditions. I mean, we're celebrating Ostara next Friday. Plus, we have already debunked the snakes as pagans thing. Irish paganism, the original spiritual tradition of the people St. Patrick was converting, was a rich, complex, nature-based belief system deeply tied to the land, the cycles of the year, and a polytheistic pantheon. When Patrick arrived, he did not erase that tradition entirely. He absorbed pieces of it, Christianized it, wove it into the new framework. Which means that when you celebrate St. Patrick's Day with attention to those older layers, you are actually getting closer to the roots of Irish culture, not further from them. Celebrate the land. Celebrate your ancestry. Celebrate the resilience of a culture that survived invasion, famine, forced displacement, and the enthusiastic colonization of its holiday by American commercial interests. That is worth celebrating. I hope this gave you some new things to talk about as you put on your green and pour yourself something cold or warm. Irish coffee is a legitimate option, and I will defend it. If you want the link to my corned beef video, that will be in the description down below. And do you have thoughts, questions, feelings, or strong opinions about Colcanon? I want to hear all of it. And if you learned something new today, be sure to leave a like down below and consider subscribing to our channel for more videos like this. We typically cover all of the pagan sabbats, but this one kind of fits right in and is super timely. Last week we discussed all things Mercury retrograde, so be sure to check it out if you haven't seen it yet. La Fela Padraig Sana Dave. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you all. And as always, every accusation is a confession. Free Palestine. Protect the First Amendment, what little is left of it. Justice for Casey Goodson Jr. We're like a month out from Jason Meade's trial. And do not let up on the Epstein files. We're still missing 3 million of them. And survivors deserve justice and accountability. Except we don't have green beer. We have Guinness, bitches. Bitches. My goodness. Because it wouldn't be St. Patrick's Day without some Guinness. We're going to go ahead and let that nitro little widget do its thing. And then we will pour it, hopefully on camera, pretty well. Pour it into my Dayton Loves beer glass. I don't know that I have an Irish Guinness glass, and I don't really want to do this over my computer, so let's not. Okay, and let's go pouring. Isn't she beautiful? Look at the perfect little foam collar there and the way the bubbles are cascading all the way down into the beer. It's just gorgeous. I do love a Guinness. Yes, I do know how to properly pour a Guinness on tap. Check her out. Isn't she pretty? Also, yes, we love the Barrel House in Dayton. Dayton does love beer. We love Dayton. Oh, that's good. Do not drink unless you're 21, kids. And then, even then, drink responsibly.